welcome to this session at the book club. As you see, the book club functions alongside Gyan Adab, which has other arms also. So we have Gyanpedia and we have Guldasta-e-Urdu. Now, we are not functioning from a physical space anymore because of lockdown, but it's wonderful that we are able to continue several of our activities online in this fashion. So today in the book club, the speaker is one who we have wanted to have for a long time. Satish and I met her at the Jaipur Lit Fest many years ago. And, you know, she is just so warm and lively and animated. And she told us about the books that she writes for children, she said. But I swear, I mean, I bought those books for my children because they were much younger then. But I enjoyed reading them too, Arifa. Now today, she is going to talk to us about a book by her father, who is a very well-known naturalist, Dr. Raza. So Arifa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Moini, and it's wonderful to see you and Satish after so long. Good evening, everyone. It is evening here, at least in Sri Lanka right now. So my family and the forests have a long-standing relationship. My grandfather was one of the earliest big game hunters turned conservationists of India. He was a contemporary of Jim Corbett. And my father has been a wildlife protection crusader of sorts. So he's in fact known as the Vasco da Gama of the Mewar jungles because he has tread most of these forests on foot and he has designed most of the wildlife sanctuaries that we have here. So he used to take me to the forests and inside the cages of leopards and bears and crocodiles and pythons so that I lose all fear of animals. And I did to a great extent. Many people ask me how I feel comfortable alone in a forest in the middle of the night without even a torch. And I tell them that I feel much more comfortable alone in a forest than I would in a city. In fact, one of my earliest memories is playing under the same banyan tree in Ranthambore, where a tigress used to be seated the whole day. So my father always told us not to fear the dark, not to fear the wild, and not to fear the unknown. And that is one of the reasons why we wrote this book together called Steed of the Jungle God, which is on my father's 70 plus years of experiences in the jungles of Mewar. And the phenomena which he has come across, which can be generally attributed to ghosts and spirits, and his quest for rational explanations behind those phenomena. And coincidentally, today is Halloween.
Yes.
I'll be telling you some ghost stories today. So let me start sharing my screen. Can you all see it now?
Yes, yes.
Yes, please.
So my grandfather, before independence, had the monopoly of arms and ammunition business in Mewar. So that kept and he was a big game hunter. So that kept my father for long periods of time in the forest. And then his school, Vidya Bhavan, had a huge campus. The Vidya Bhavan Society is even there today in Udaipur. It is a group of around 17 institutions. And their land doesn't run in acres, it runs in kilometers. In fact, my uncle Raza Tehsin, he has served as the honorary president of the Vidya Bhavan Society for 10 years, and he has been long associated with it. So my father used to go to Vidya Bhavan, which was the first co-educational school in India. And there were these vast tracts of land, forested land in the campus. There were these patches of campus, some, patches of forest, some perennial streams. And my father had made his secret lab in one of those forest patches. He used to steal chemicals from the chemistry lab and go and experiment in his own lab. He had in fact succeeded in making a 2-stage rocket before the authorities developed his secret lab and dismantled it. So his school also helped a lot to ignite his experimental and explorative spirit. In fact, once he tells me that a camel had died on campus, and their biology teacher made the students boil the carcass of the camel for 7 to 10 days. And then the teacher had them scrap the flesh out of the bones and finally recreate the camel skeleton in their biology lab. So that talks about the dedication of the teacher, and it's an amazing lesson in anatomy. So my father grew up with a hunger to explore the wild. After independence, my grandfather had to surrender his license of arms and ammunition, and he was the pioneer of mining in Mewar. In fact, later on, he was also the mayor of Udaipur, and he did a lot of work for tribal upliftment. So he was a pioneer of mining in Mewar, and he had around 8 mines. Now, in those days, you didn't have a ceiling on the amount of, area of land that you could lease out for mining. So he had around 8 mines, and each one was around 40 miles long. And all these mines, all these forested hills and valleys were more highly populated by wild animals than by humans. They used to mine a lot of minerals, including mica and asbestos and beryl and calcite and garnet. There was even a pit of emeralds that was there. So my grandfather also used to spend a lot of time in the forests. And as I said, he did a lot of work for the tribals. And Topa Wala Babu Aya was one of the folk songs sung for him by the tribals in those days. So my father stayed for long periods of time in the forest, taking care of one of the mines, which was in Dholi Ghati in Mewar. And there, of course, there was these gang of dacoits that used to operate in those regions then. And the only upper hand my father had above the dacoits was that he had a rifle, and the dacoits had those basic muzzle loader guns. So they kept away from him. My father lived as a hunter, as a doctor, and as a hermit in the valley of Dholi Ghati. So he would go to the mines every day, which was around 5 miles away in the hills. He would come back to his hut, have his lunch, then again go back to the mines and come back in the evening. And he said that whenever inadvertently, invariably, there would be 15 to 20 tribals waiting for him when he came back to his tattered hut, which was there in Dholi Ghati. And there was no habitation in a radius of 5 kilometers around that hut. But these tribals would travel from far and wide to get treated by my father, because there were no government or non-government organizations working in those remote areas in those days. So he says that there were these 3 basic diseases that were prevalent there, for which he used to keep some medicines. One was malaria, the other was diarrhea, and the third was Guinea worm. Now, I don't know if any of you knows what Guinea worm is, but the worm gets inside your body through water, and then it carries on the next stage of the life cycle inside your body. So you actually drink the eggs, then the worm is born inside your body, and then it can pop out from anywhere in your body, just the head. Just the head will be popping out. And you can't pull out the worm, because if you do that, the worm breaks and then regrows in the body again. So my father, what he would do is he would inject a chemical into the tiny head of the worm popping out from somewhere. That would make the worm limp. Then he would take a straw or a matchstick and very slowly wind that whole limp worm outside the body. And then he would rest the wound. Sometimes he said he got tribals with 20 to 30 guinea worms in their body, and some of those worms would be popping out of their eyes and their tongues. So it was only that much that he could do, but he tried his best. And he talks about the misery of those tribals. They were living in abject poverty. And he tells a couple of instances which I'm offhand, I'm recalling. One of it is that, there was this chowkidar who used to work in his tattered hut. He would once in a while come and clean my father's hut. And he was an old fellow himself. And once, can you see the screen? The screen has suddenly gone. Okay, it's back again. Yeah, so once he heard my father, okay. So he tells me about this old man who was working at his hut. He would once in a while sometimes come and clean his hut. And my father, once he heard this distant wailing from one of the villages, and he said, Bhairaba was his name. He said, Bhairaba, it seems somebody has passed away in your village. Why don't you just go back? And Bhairaba said, no, sir, actually, no, Sahib. My mother is actually the one who is the oldest in the village. And I think she has died. I will just let me, complete the work and then go. So these tribals, they really dreaded a death in the family, because they would have to go to the money lender, and it would push their generations into debt. Another instance my father tells me is that once he got this old woman waiting for him when he came back from his mines one day, and her entire throat was burnt. So he asked how this happened. The husband was there. She couldn't even speak because the throat was so badly burned. So these tribals, they eat when they earn. They are daily wage laborers. And the husband had got the Guinea Worm infection, and he couldn't go to work for quite a few days. So at least for a week or something, they had not had a proper meal. Finally, he felt a little better, and he went to work in the village. And by the end of the day, he could get some rotten grains along with him, and he would have given that to his wife to boil so that both of them could have it. The wife would have thought that the husband would not give her share, and she swallowed the boiling grains as it is from the pot, and that's what had burnt her whole throat. So in fact, a few years later, in the late 1960s and early 70s, Bapu was my grandfather. He was fondly known as Bapu by the tribals. So Bapu had to surrender all the mines back to the government. They were on a 100-year lease, but he had to surrender all the mines back because, these were forested areas, and then there were no roads connecting these forested mines to the railheads. And they had to anyway pay the royalties, and they were running in huge losses. So my grandfather had to surrender all these mines, in fact, along with a lot of mined material lying as it is on the mines. And soon after that, Indira Gandhi came to power, and she built all the roads. But anyway, after that, my father and his two brothers, they started a plastic industry. And my father says that he feels very heartened and very warm that after a few years, him and his brothers could work along with the UNICEF, and my uncle and my father, they developed this filter which was distributed free of cost all throughout Rajasthan and also in a few countries in Africa by the UNICEF. And later on, UNICEF declared Rajasthan completely Guinea worm free. So he feels very good about it, seeing the state of tribals that he saw in those days. Now, in those days, off and on, Bapu would receive requests from the government to cull the cattle lifters or the man-eaters of that region. Now, you can imagine the tribals who lived in such abject misery. If they had only one cattle and they lost it to a leopard or a big cat, the whole family would die of starvation. So on and off, Bapu would receive these requests, and even my father would. But there was one thing that Bapu Tehsin, my grandfather, he always told my father, that jungle legends are not baseless. So if ever you hear about a jungle legend, try to get to the bottom of it. And I'll be telling you a few of those stories today from this book, Steed of the Jungle God. So the year was 1960. So this is the tattered hut where my father used to live in Doligati as a hermit, as a doctor, and as a hunter. And well, the first story is the haunted well. So the only thing my father knew how to cook was fried eggs. So he would have that for breakfast, he would have that for lunch, he would have that for dinner. And if in one of those lucky nights, if he went, with his rifle, he used to, roam those hills and valleys alone. And in his wanderings, if he would get a small game, he would come and roast it over fire and have it with salt. And that was a big treat for him. Sometimes he would, in fact, take the tribals along. And if he was able to shoot a small deer or an antelope, he would distribute the meat amongst the protein-starved tribals, and they would be delighted to take it back to their families. So my father, every day, he would go to the mines and he would come back. On a few days, he would take along his prospecting hammer. This was to explore any new veins in the rocks and so on. And he would take a longer route to come back from his mines to his hut in Doligati. And one of the days he was coming back in 1961 and he got really thirsty on the way. Now he would not drink water from just about anywhere because most of the water bodies were infested with Guinea worms, and at least 3/4 of the population of that area was suffering from Guinea worm. So he had actually identified a few water bodies where he would stop if he really got thirsty and he had to drink on the way. One such was the field of Lakhma and Vaski. He had known Lakhma and Vaski for some time. And he would on and off, just stop by on his way back and have a small chit chat with Lakhma, maybe give him a beedi to smoke. He himself didn't smoke, but he always carried a bundle of beedis with him because it was a very good way to strike a conversation with a local. That day, when he stopped at the field of Lakhma and Vaski, he saw a small crowd near the well. So he was quite surprised because these fields were quite spaced out and there were not generally, a lot of people around. He went to the well and he saw Vaski's body being fished out of that well. Now this was quite a shock for him. So he asked the villagers, and the villagers told him that Lakhma and Vaski were having fights over Lakhma's sister for the last few days. And Vaski was completely fed up of the daily bickering, and she had left Lakhma and gone to her mother's place to stay. Now, finally, after a few days, the sister would have prodded Lakhma to go and get Vaski back. And he had gone in the morning to Vaski's mother's place. He would have managed to woo her and to convince her to come back with him. And they had returned. And while they were returning, before they went to their hut, Lakhma just told Vaski to wait for a little while before he got some work done, and he came back. Now, Vaski was waiting alone by that well. And just then, Lakhma's sister would have seen Vaski, and she just came there to say hello to her. And Vaski freaked out. She thought she's coming to, have another fight or whatever. So either she slipped inside the well and died, or she would have jumped inside and drowned. So they took out Vaski's body that day. My father was in quite shock. But after a few days, he started hearing stories of that well being haunted by a spirit. Now, he kept on hearing the story for a few days. And after that, he decided that he had to find out what was going on. So he went to Lakhma and he spoke. So Lakhma told him, of course, there were no clocks or watches that the villagers had in those days, and they measured time through the movement of sun and stars. And Lakhma told him, he pointed at the sky and he said that at this particular time, when this constellation is here at this angle at night, that's when strange noises and sounds start to emit from the well. So gathering from what Lakhma told my father, told Raza gathered that, it was somewhere around midnight. he told Lakma that he will come to his hut, to his field, one of the nights, and sit near the well to find out what was going on. Lakma said, "You're your own boss, sir. If you want to come, you can come and sit." So one night, after having dinner, my father picked up his rifle. He took his torch. Of course, he didn't switch on the torch because batteries were a very precious commodity in those days. And your eyes get acclimatized to the dark after some time anyway. So he picked up his rifle and his torch and he started towards Lakma's fields. By the time he reached Lakma's fields, it was quite dark. And he went to his hut to tell him that he had arrived. He was surprised to find Lakma's door closed. It was summer, and in those traditional huts, the only source of ventilation is the door. And that is generally kept open by the villagers for ventilation during summers because it can get really hot inside. But the fear of the spirit was so much that the family had decided to close the door at night, every night in summers. My father went there, he knocked on the hut and informed Lakma that he had arrived. Lakma didn't bother to open the hut and open the door. He said, "Wah Sahib, why don't you go and sit and do whatever you have to do?" So my father went to the well and he sat a little away from the well behind some bushes and he started to wait. Right at midnight, the sound started to come from the well. Now this well was fitted with a Persian wheel. And I hope you know what, I've seen what a Persian wheel is. So when a Persian wheel revolves, there are 4 distinct sounds. One is that of the bullock moving. The other is of the villager trying to, twist the tail of the bullocks and trying to prod them to move a little faster, which is like hut sound. The third is a sharp choo that comes due to lack of lubrication in the wheel. And the fourth is a periodic sound of a stopper, which is cut, 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 cut. All those 4 sounds were coming. My father couldn't see anything. So he crouched, and in that crouching position, he very slowly went to the channel that takes the water from the well to the fields to irrigate them. He went and he dipped his hand inside one of those channels, and the channel was dry. So actually the Persian wheel was not revolving. So he couldn't really figure out what was going on. He went back behind the bush, slowly lifted his rifle, placed the torch on top of that rifle. And just when he was trying to take aim and switch on the torch, a force went right above his head and pushed him to the ground. And then he breathed a long sigh of relief that he had not pulled the trigger. It was a pair of great horned owls who were the mischief makers. And it was a pair of artists who were trying to mimic 4 different sounds. Now the Indian horned owl, or the eagle owl, as we call them now, are expert mimickers, like the hill manas are. And they can very expertly mimic the human sounds. Bapu had told Raza that many a time you might be walking alone in the jungle and you would hear a sound of laughter behind you. Or you would hear 2 villagers speaking. You would not be able to decipher the words, but the tonality, the undulations of the voice, everything would be just as the tribals talk. And that would invariably be either a horned owl or a pair of them. And that is the reason in India, many people use them in Tona or Totka. This is a horned owl flying away. These are big owls. They have, pointed ears like that of a devil. And Yeah, they are expert mimickers, and they are used widely in black magic in India. In fact, some people say that if you worship Lakshmi for 4 years, and on the fourth year, on Diwali, on the moonless night of Diwali, if you can locate the nest of a horned owl, you will find the philosopher's stone in it, Paras Patthar as we call it, which turns anything to gold on touch. And that is the reason why these horned owls have been hunted so much in India over the decades. So it was a pair of horned owls. My father was very happy that he had solved the mystery. He went to Lakhma's hut. He again, knocked on the hut and he said, Lakhma, you have nothing to worry about. There is no spirit here. It is just a pair of these horned owls, trying to mimic these sounds. But Lakhma was completely unenthusiastic. He didn't bother to open the hut. He said, Ba Sahib, why don't you go home and get some sleep? We will talk tomorrow about it. The next day, when my father reached the mines, all the workers were already waiting his arrival. My father, Raza, he said, he was really surprised. He still doesn't understand how the communication system works in those remote villages. Anyway, he told them the story. He told them this is what has happened, and it is just a pair of horned owls making mischief. And then there was silence in the gathering for a long minute. After that, one of the villagers, he spoke. He said, Sahib, these spirits, they keep away from metal, and you had a gun. And that is why they transformed themselves into owls and they flew away. So that was the haunted well. And we might say that, these illiterate villagers, them and their misconceptions and their superstitions. But when it comes to all this, the city dwellers, the educated city dwellers are no better. So I'll tell you another short story from the book, which is The Witch. So it was before the independence. Udaipur, the city of Udaipur, was the princely, the seat of the princely state of Mewar. It was a fortified city. It was a walled city. Nobody could enter or exit it after 10 p.m. unless you had the permission from the Maharana to do so. So my grandfather, of course, he had the permission. He had the letter from the Maharana because he would on and off go for big game hunting or other such. And that night, he was returning from the forest of Jaisalmer with his two sons, Raza and Riaz, and his friend Zakir Bhai in his B model Ford. So Bapu was driving his B model Ford. He came to the city. He produced the letter for the Santri to enter the city. The Santri opened the gate, the gatekeeper that is, and let the car in. And in those days, you can imagine there was no electricity. There were no street lamps in the walled city. It was pitch dark. Shadows were dancing with the headlights. And Bapu was driving towards Zakir Bhai's house to drop him. Just as he turned the lane, he saw this old woman standing right in the middle of the road. She was double bent over her stick. Her whole body was covered in wrinkles, and she had just a few wisps of air on her scalp. And on her person, she had nothing but a thin lion cloth around her waist. Bapu got the car near her. He honked once. She didn't even look at the car. She kept standing there in the middle of the road. There was complete silence in the car. After some time, she just took one small step forward, and there was enough space for Bapu to drive past her. And he did. Nobody spoke a word. Bapu reached Zakir Bhai's house and he stopped. Zakir Bhai got down of the car, and the only thing he said as he got down was Jeevti Dakkan, which means the living witch. Bapu came back home with his two sons and they went to sleep. But next morning, Bapu called both Riaz and Raza. And he asked them, "You saw that old woman last night?" Riaz and Raza said, "Yes." "Did you see that she didn't move at all when the car approached her?" They said, "Yes." "She didn't even react to the horn or your headlights?" They said, "Yes." He said, "Zakir Bhai called her a Jeevti Daktan when he got down?" They said, "Yes." He said, "There is no such thing as a living witch." Now Raza and Riaz didn't know what to say. So Bapu explained to them. In those days, there were no joint toilets attached to the house. There were community toilets called dhunda, where most people would go to relieve themselves. He said that she would have had call of nature, and you saw how old she was. She was just going there by hunch. She could neither hear your car, nor could she see the headlights. So she was no Jeevti Dakkan, she was no living witch. She was just an old woman answering the call of nature. So that was the rational upbringing that Bapu gave to his children. And in fact, that later on resulted in many interesting discoveries too. And I'll tell you another one such interesting discovery, another story from the book, which is called The Gliding Spirit. There was a prosperous civilization, a human settlement called Arampura in the forests of Dharyavad in Rajasthan. It had vast expanses of fertile land. Arampura ironically means the place of rest. And this particular settlement, this human settlement, was destroyed thrice by an epidemic. And the fourth time, when they were tottering on their feet and just trying to revive, plague struck. And it utterly destroyed that human settlement. Not a single soul survived. And slowly the forest took over. And the lone survivor of that tragedy was a well, which came to be known as the poisonous well by the tribers and villagers of that region. Stories started, and it grew into a legend that every day at night, a spirit flies out of that well, and if it flies over your head, you would die. So my father, Raza, he had been hearing this legend for quite a few years. And then he decided to go and find out what was happening. The year was 1979. They had already surrendered their mines back, started their plastic industry. So of course, Bapu didn't get, as many chances to go visit the forest as he used to, and he was completely in the conservation drive. And so this prospect of going to the forests of Dharyavad on an expedition really excited him, and he was already ready to go. So it was my father, Bapu, my father's brother-in-law, Rajnikant Varma, and my father's younger brother, Rafiq, who decided to go to the jungles of Dharyavad. My father spoke to his forest officer friend, Shakti Mohanji, who made all the arrangements there. He was the game warden of the Jaisalmer Wildlife Sanctuary there. So my father and the party started from Udaipur in their ambassador. And they were supposed to, stay for a night in Jaisalmer and then pick up Shakti Mohanji from there. So when they reached Jaisalmer, their car broke down. And there was this, forester there in Jaisalmer, and he shook his head sagaciously and he said, "This is an omen. This is a warning that you should not be going after the flying spirit. If there is still time, please return to Udaipur." But my father was never the one to follow omens anyway. And the mechanics were not easy to be found even in 1979 in Mewar. So my father and Shakti Mohanji, they drove down. They actually went on their bike to Udaipur, got a mechanic, and it took them a couple of days to repair the car. They started again, once the car was all repaired, towards Dharyavad. Once they reached Dharyavad, Shakti Mohanji took them to a small forest outpost, an abandoned forest outpost. A forester was already there. He was trying to make some arrangements for their stay. They went there, cleaned that abandoned outpost, made the arrangements there. And then my father didn't know the forest of Dharyawat that well. So they needed a forest guide. My father, Shakti Mohanji, along with the forester and Rafiq and Bapu and Rajnikantji, they all went to the village to find a good forest guide. Now, when the villagers came to know why these men from the city have come, they all backed off. They said, "We are sorry, Sahib, you can do as you please, but if you take our advice, please go back. And if you don't want to take our advice, you can do what you want, but none of us are going to be a party to it." So they all refused, that none of them will be accompanying them in the forest to look for the flying spirit. Now, my father didn't know what to do. They had to find a good forest guide. So they spoke to the forester again, and he remembered this guy called Bhagga. And he was very conversant with the forest there. And but he stayed around 10 kilometers away from where they were. And 10 kilometers in that terrain in the forest was a long drive. But my father went along with Shakti Mohanji and Rafiq to talk to Bhagga. When they approached Bhagga's fields, my father realized that he was quite a poor farmer. The fields were not being sowed, and they found Bhagga sleeping on a tattered cot there with a dirty injection bottle by his side. My father, Raza, he went there and he spoke to Bhagga and he said that, this is what we are planning to do, Bhagga. Can you come along and help us? Bhagga said, "Bapu, Sahib, you can see, how ill I am. I can't even get out of my cot. I've been given this injection. The doctor has told me to rest. I'm sorry, I can't help you." So my father gave him a 10 rupee note and he said, "Don't worry, Bhagga. You get all right first. This is where we are staying. Once you're fine, you come to us. I will give you a daily wage of 30, 40 rupees, whatever, some he would have said." And he said that you can have your meals with us as well. And you can start when you're all right. The 10 rupee note galvanized Bhagga. He got up from the cot and he said, "Sahib, I'm not that unwell after all. I think we can start from today itself." So that is how Bhagga came along and joined them in the search. They very sportingly decided to eat 2 meals a day, in the morning and at night, because Bapu and Rajnikantji couldn't come along with them. They decided to stay at the forest outpost. And every day, every morning, Bhagga would take Raza, Rafiq, and Shakti Mohanji into the forest. It was a beautiful forest. My father loved exploring it for a few days. It's a deciduous forest. In fact, it is now the Sita Mata Wildlife Sanctuary. Every day they would go in the morning, explore the forest, see those perennial streams. There were old Arjun trees there. And they quite enjoyed, exploring the forest, but the flying spirit completely eluded them. In fact, Raza discovered mouse deer, which is the smallest deer. From there, it is called Ram Gai. And that was the first reporting of mouse deer from Rajasthan. But they could not find the flying spirit. 2 people who were very happy with the arrangement and of not finding the spirit, in fact, were Bapu and Bhagga. Bapu, because he got to stay in the forest, and Bhagga, because he was getting the daily wages and he had not even come across the deadly spirit. But my father had to finally decide that they would have to call off the expedition because they were running out of resources. So finally, Raza spoke to both Shakti Mohanji and Rafiq, and he said that, let's give it a try one last time. Let's go tomorrow, explore the areas we haven't seen once more, and then let's head back. So they started the next day. They kept on walking through the forest the whole day. And from dusk, they were sitting on a slope, which actually ended in a perennial stream. And on the other side were these beautiful Arjun trees. And that's when Rafiq told Raza that, "Raza Bhaiya, it seems this was just a legend after all. There is no such thing as a flying spirit here." And Bhakka got very agitated. He said, what are you talking about, Sahib? You're talking, you're sitting in the abode of the flying spirit and denying its existence. He got very agitated. And just when he was saying those things, the flying spirit flew right above their heads. It crossed the stream and went to the other side of the forest and disappeared in the Arjun trees. Raza and Rafiq and Shakti Mohanji got so excited. They skipped down the slope, they crossed the stream, they went to the other side and started exploring it, but they could not find any sign of the flying spirit. It had completely vanished. But my father, he went around, he explored the signs on the trees, on the bark of the trees and so on. And he called Rafiq and Shakti Mohanji and he said he knew what the flying spirit was. It was a large brown flying squirrel. And that was the first reporting of a giant flying squirrel from the forests of Rajasthan. So they were quite excited and delighted, obviously. And when their excitement, died down a little, that's when they realized that there was one person missing, Bhagga. He was nowhere to be found. They went around looking for him, and they finally found him sitting behind some shrubs and bushes and shivering. So my father, just gave him some money. He said, Bhagga, don't worry, go and make some offering to your deity tomorrow. Nothing is going to happen to you. So Raza says that, he doesn't know if Bhagga went and made those offerings to the local deity or not. But the next morning he returned high on the local alcohol. So this is a flying squirrel. It is a large brown flying squirrel. It is quite large as the name goes, and it has this thin membrane connecting its four legs. It doesn't really fly, it glides. It generally lives, towards the canopy of the trees, and it glides down from the canopy. It looks like a flying parachute if you see it in flight. So now for many years, the forest officers kept calling, my father back to the jungles of Dharyavat to, just come once and maybe, see the jungles of Dharyavat and tell them how they were then and how they are now. But my father never got to go back again to the forests. And finally, in 2008, there was this forest officer who had been calling him for long, and he decided to just, make that trip. So I also went along with him. My partner Aditya was there, and Saadat and Hasnan, Raza's younger brother Rafiq, who had accompanied him then, his sons, my cousins Saadat and Hasnan, they also came along. So all of us, we went and visited the Sita Mata Wildlife Sanctuary, the jungles of Dharyavat. Now the forest department knows exactly, where these flying squirrels are and what time they will come out. They are nocturnal animals, so they generally come out at dusk. So you have to go and wait near those tree trunks. They live in those holes in the trunks, and they come out to forage for food around dusk. So one such dusk, when we were there, we were waiting for these flying squirrels to come out. And Aditya or Saadat, one of them, would have got tired standing. And he tried to sit on this pile of rocks, which is there by the side. And the forester who was with us, he freaked out. He said, no, sir, don't sit there. I will bring some chairs for all of you. Just sit on the chairs. So my father writes, and I'll read out the last two paras of this particular story. My father says, just then the flying squirrel appeared and the youngsters got all excited. So I could not ask why they had stopped Saadat from sitting on the rocks. Later, on a little probing, I came to know that that pile of rocks was a madman's grave. This mentally challenged person had turned up some weeks back in the jungle near the rest house. The guards tried to give him food, but he didn't touch it and passed away under that tree. The next day, as we returned to Udaipur, there were two thoughts resonating in my mind. One, whether I would be able to visit Arampura ever again. and the other, if in the years to come, another legend would start of a madman's spirit buried under the sprawling tree in the midst of the jungles of Tharyapur. So there are, of course, many more stories in the book. You can read the book, but I will read the last para of the last chapter, which is called Faith. And Raza writes, mysteries have brushed past me, tiptoed by my side, teased me and stopped and shook my hands. I've always been able to rationalize the darkness and the unknown and the fear associated with them, even if I've not found answers every time. But there is one mystery that I do not understand. I flip the pages of my memory yellowed with time and meet this fellow every now and then. He's invisible, yet rock solid. I implore him to reveal himself to me, but he dissolves in the rough sea of time without divulging his secret. However, he's kind enough to answer my one question. What is your name? I ask. Faith, he says. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Lovely.
Thank you. Very nice. Excellent stories there.
Good storytelling.
Are you looking? Are you working in wildlife, trying to preserve wildlife in Sri Lanka?
Yes. I have been the honorary wildlife warden of Udaipur district. So
Okay.
I had 4 sanctuaries and a national park under my jurisdiction, but that was like, just an honorary thing. But yes, I've been working with my father. I've been writing a lot about wildlife through my columns in various newspapers and magazines. I've written a lot of books on wildlife for children. So yes, that is my way of trying to
Giving back to society.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Mohini and I and a few of us went down to Ranthambore. Early in the morning, we went. And guess what? After 4 hours, we hadn't seen a hint of a tiger down there at all. It was winter time.
Oh.
And again, in the afternoon, we went for the second round. No luck again that time. So we were very unlucky not to see.
Yes, we also went to Gir. Came back without seeing any lions.
Really? I'm very, very surprised. We would have
So
seen at least
disappointed.
20 lions in Gir. And Ranthambore, when we went, so my father, he was never a forest officer, but he was the advisor to the government of Rajasthan for many years. He was also the wildlife warden, honorary wildlife warden for more than 35 years of Udaipur. And he did everything in an honorary capacity. He had the forest department with everything, designing the sanctuaries and everything else he did in an honorary capacity. In fact, he would have spent all his life savings on wildlife conservation rather than making any money out of it. So with him, I had gone to Ranthambore, and we had stayed inside the sanctuary. We had stayed at Jogi Mahal. If you know, there is the small palace right inside. We had stayed there. And I was so fed up of seeing these tigers every day. With the field director every day, he would take my father and he would, not really follow the paths and go wherever the tiger was going. And once I remember, we were sitting in Ranthambore in our open jeep. There were 3 tigers. One was right at the front and 2 were on the sides. And my father said that, if he took his foot out, he could actually place it on the tiger. And he said that I have lost all respect for tiger after coming here because, this is unacceptable. And we were so fed up of seeing tigers that us, me and our friends, the forest officers' children, we just used to play under that banyan tree in Jogi Mahal and not really go for any of the rides. And as I said, there was a tigress seated there the whole day, under that banyan tree, and we would be playing under that same banyan tree.
A similar story friends of mine have given. They had got to the Tadoba.
Okay.
Another friend was the chief principal conservator of Maharashtra, and that was his last day. So in service. So he wanted to go around the Tadoba. And another friend of mine from Pune had visited. So these two were going. And there was a jeep driver. They came to a standstill and there were 5 tigers came walking around them, sniffing at them, looking at them.
Oh.
And he said, we did not move around for quite some time, we didn't know what to do. And he said, this is my last visit as a conservator. So maybe they're giving me a farewell that way.
Oh, that's so sweet. But Arifa, I know Kapila has raised a hand. We will come to you, sir. You said that your father raised you to not be afraid of the wild and the night. So has it happened? Are you truly not afraid?
No, I'm actually not, Mohini. And I think that's something my father and especially my partner say, that, it can be quite detrimental, because whenever I see a snake, I have to go and catch it. And I'm not an expert snake catcher. And as you can see, our little cottage here in Sri Lanka, it is on a small lake island. And we do get a lot of critters. We sometimes get crocodiles floating past my window here, or I will have some, snakes inside the house. And I really want to go and catch them. And because I do not know if it's a venomous or a non-venomous snake, it can be,
It can be dangerous.
You're looking at a person who in IIT days when, we used to have the Hawaii Lake right behind us. And snakes would come into people's...
Sorry?
Snakes would come into people's rooms, etc. Initially, I killed a few. We used to have a hockey stick. But then I said, we are wrong. We have taken their place. That's why they come here.
That's right.
I used to use the hockey stick and my hands to catch the snakes, take them into the jungle behind and to toss it in there.
That's wonderful.
Kapila, Eraj Bharucha is there. Eraj Bharucha, you heard of him? He's a bird man of Pune.
Ornithologist, right?
He's the father of wildlife.
Very happy to have you here,
Eraj. Why do you?
I've heard of your father, of course, and I've heard of your father.
Okay.
I've been in Sita Mata and probably sat under the same trees.
You have. How wonderful.
The funny thing was I saw it, but I couldn't photograph it. And I spent 2 nights. Actually, I went to Sita Mata as an evaluator for conservation thing, maybe about 7-8 years ago.
Okay.
And it is a beautiful forest.
Yes.
And it's full of bird life in the morning, and it's really very brilliant.
Right.
I'm happy that you told us these stories, because I love tribal stories. Yeah, it's wonderful. People tell you beautiful things. I've experienced this with tribal people and have these lovely stories, and you often wonder how true they are, but it's great to hear these myths and stories that they tell. Thank you so much. It was very nice.
Thank you so much.
I think Kaveri wants to ask a question. Kaveri, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
I found it just fascinating. Thank you so much. Because I spent part of my childhood in the wilds. My father was in the army, and we used to be posted in, he was posted in places where there was no habitation. We lived in mud huts with thatched roofs, and we generally ran wild. I just found your story so beautiful.
Thank
you. And how you present the fact that creatures other than human beings have a legitimate right to their existence, how tribal people in their simplicity sometimes mistake their presence as representing spirits and ghosts. And it was just such a beautiful account that you gave us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very kind of you to say that.
Farooq, would you like to speak?
Yeah. I just wanted to, first of all, Arifa, you set up, let me speak. बहुत अच्छा स्टोरी बोलते हैं आप आरिफा, बहुत अच्छा बोलते हैं. I mean, I could just listen like this to your stories, and they're all real stories.
Yeah.
Under Gyanadab, me and my wife were Gyanadab trustees, and Satish, me and Mustafa and some friends of ours have started a program called Gyanpedia. In the last 6 months, we have started this program, and one of the first programs we had was on preservation of tigers by Vipul Gupta, who's doing a lot of work in Kanhe forest for preserving the tigers. So he's not doing anything to preserve the tigers, but he and his team called Earth Force or something. They're working for the tribals around the village to give them subsistence and all, so that they don't depend on the forest, go into the forest, and then there's this big quarrel of the tiger killed us, so we killed the tiger and all that stuff. So Gyanpedia, we are doing very good work on birds. We had already program on birds. And my curiosity goes, what exactly are you doing in Sri Lanka? I heard you are in Sri Lanka, and the big thunderstorm behind you, I can see.
Yes, there is.
So you landed up in Sri Lanka.
Well, actually, my partner, he has business interests here. So that is the reason.
There are lovely forests in Sri Lanka. There's a very...
Yes. Indeed. In fact, Aditya, he's into manufacturing polyester resin, but he also has a couple of hydroelectric power projects here. And they are at wonderful locations. Up in the hills. One is in a rainforest and another one is in the, high tea states of the country. So, and you have amazing forests here, as you said very rightly, and you all are invited. You're most welcome to visit Sri Lanka. And if you do come over, please
Which part of Sri Lanka are you in?
We are in Colombo. Yeah. So
in fact, I have relations in Colombo. My daughter's in-laws are in Colombo.
Okay.
And we have visited Colombo twice, etc. They're lovely people. I enjoyed ourselves in Colombo.
Yes, very warm people. And it is perfect for me, to write also here in these very natural and beautiful environments. It is the perfect setting for my writing too. Really wonderful.
Ask Mohini to tell you the story of the great horned owl and me.
Satish, I will if we have time, but Indu has raised her hand.
Okay, Indu Kamala.
Let her ask. And just before Indu speaks, I just want to tell Farooq that you said that she speaks beautifully and she told the stories beautifully. She writes beautifully too.
Yes.
Delightful books.
By the storytelling,
Yes, Indu, over to you.
Arifa, we enjoyed the stories and it was very graphic and dramatic, and it reminded us of our trips because we go to Dandeli about twice in a year. We've been to Sri Lanka and we've seen the animals there. And in Singapore, the flying squirrel is a very beautiful kind of an experience at night. And when we just walk around, you can hear the rustling and this flying squirrel. And a very beautiful fellow.
Yes.
Orange and rust
colored, yes.
Huge fellow. Flying squirrel.
It is, yes.
Yeah. And at the Rajaji sanctuary, as the jeep was going, suddenly there was this, barking of the deer.
Right.
And we were all wondering what has happened. And the driver stopped. A white tiger, you could hardly see. It jumped out of that bush.
Wow.
And it was crossing. Yeah, and we were very lucky because at first you can't make out, the camouflage is so good. You don't know whether there's an animal or what.
So
and then at quite a distance away, it jumped and it went off into the jungle. But that was something like a grand vista, like it was a one-time kind of a... Otherwise, you're looking at tigers elsewhere in Lincoln Park Zoo and elsewhere. They keep them quite free so that you can see them. But here, this was a kind of a live experience.
Absolutely.
And all the birds were twittering and, the jungle was crazy. And in the Kali River, the crocodile came right out, and that we were in that basket that coracle
Oh, yeah.
sailing down.
This is in Dandeli.
Dandeli, you know, Dandeli,
And
Karnataka.
I've been in that.
Yeah,
I've been in that.
Yeah.
The basket.
And
Yes.
they warned us that the crocodiles are around. So just don't stick your legs out into the water or something like that. But
Right.
this was a wild kind of a crocodile, and it swam off. But just now I read last week, it attacked a boy, and they found his body a few days later. But that Kali River is infested with crocodiles. Very
Infested or populated?
whatever. Nature, thank you. And what is called the steed of the jungle? Is that
That's another
what is the
story.
steed?
That's another story. So I think you should read the book to find out who is the Steed.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But do you know the most magnificent animal I have seen is a gaur.
The gaur.
From Belgaum, etc.
Dandeli,
We were driving. My family, one of my uncles was chief conservator of forest also, and but he wasn't there. But another uncle, and he stopped the car, and we saw this magnificent animal. I think I've seen them in zoos, etc. But they are beautiful. I consider them really breathtakingly. And according to the myths that are there about him, they're the most dangerous animals. They'll just suddenly take off and go.
Yes.
Mohini had a story to tell you now. She'll talk about something.
Yes, please.
Mo?
Yes, here I am. Okay, the story that he's referring to. So we were not planning to see wildlife or anything. We were in England. And whenever we're in England, I insist on going to Stratford-on-Avon because I'm a Shakespeare buff. So we went, and we'd done this before, but something new we did that time. Mary Arden's house, Shakespeare's mother, has been developed as a tourist haunt. And one thing they have done is that where the barns are, they've been practicing falconry. And falconry now, the whole thing about training a falcon, right, to obey commands and to fly and to catch something or to bring it to you and so on. But they've trained other birds also, So first they did a demonstration. They showed how a falcon would sit on your arm and give the signal, and it flies in a circle and comes back and rewarded with a little piece of chicken. And then he brought an owl. And he said, okay, now who would like to demonstrate falconry with this owl? Now the owl, it was quite large. And I didn't realize I would be so scared of an owl, but I was. And those eyes, my God, such beady eyes, and the way it moves its head. Ooh, so no way I was going anywhere near it. Everyone literally retreated, when that owl was brought. But Satish, of course, is fearless. So he said, yes, I'll try it. So he was given that leather gauntlet to wear, and the owl was sat on his arm, and they were introduced to each other. And then the command was given.
What was her name?
Jessica. She was called Jessica. And she took off, and he threw something in the air, and she caught it, a mouse or something, he threw in the air, she caught it, and she brought it back, and she sat on his arm again. And then she looked at everyone. I tell you, everyone retreated one further step. And the way she looked at me, I thought, oh my gosh, this is scary.
She was jealous of Mohini.
She gave me a especially nasty look, that's for sure.
So that's lovely to hear.
I mean, an experience with a wild creature, in an urban area. That was very, very interesting.
Yes. That's one thing that's lovely to hear about that, Mohini. And here I would say that, we have a lot of wildlife in a metropolitan, Colombo, which is very rare in a metropolitan city in India. So as I said, we live in a small lake island colony, and we even have crocodiles in the lake. We have a lot of monitor lizards. Now this garden at the back, it comes alive with fireflies every evening. I have like dozens and dozens of fireflies in the garden. There are monitor lizards. There is a porcupine that comes in our garage Sometimes at night when we are trying to park the car, there are a couple of porcupines. So it's really sad to see how the wild in India, which when my father talks about his days and how they lived with the wildlife in the cities, has completely gone in most of the Indian metropolitan cities. In fact, that was the reason why I wrote one of the books, which is called Wild in the Backyard for children. And I have written about the wild animals that you can actually find in the backyard, because if you don't have any interaction with wildlife or nature, how will you grow to love it or to protect it? You are not going to do, you're not going to do that.
In fact, the reaction is to be afraid of it.
Yes, you're just
which is, what happens with me. I'm scared. Satish luckily isn't. Okay, Airaj, I see you have raised your hand. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, just a tiny story.
Please, please.
We have a family of kids which go around us at Koregaon Park in Pune.
Right.
And, one day my wife had set a rat trap. She has this persistent battle with rats. Put a rat trap out and left it outside, and something got into the trap. And then when I had a look at it in the morning, I said, oh God, it's a baby civet.
Oh, okay.
So we, of course, got it released. But this civet, the family of civets walks on a cable for the television across from one house to another every night. So I've very often sat there at about 7 o'clock waiting for him to cross and taken pictures.
How lovely.
So,
that's lovely. In fact, a family of civets stays right above on my roof here. And my only problem is that, they pee on us at times. So like a small shower coming from the roof. So that's my only.
Arifa, this is, I've seen civets in Koregaon Park at a height of about the 6th floor or 5th floor, walking from one building to the other on a single cable.
Yeah.
What the hell do you do?
They are expert, acrobats. They can
really great.
All those.
And it's beautiful watching the tail as it swings from side to side.
As a balance. They use the tail as a balance.
Yes, and another thing, of course, which I invariably get to see is them mating, because we have a transparent sky roof. And
oh, that's very nice.
As if there is no tomorrow. Till kingdom come, they will be mating. So we have palm civets here.
Yeah.
So, I think I'll have to take your leave now.
Yes, Mo, that's what I was about to say. Mo, please.
Yes, Arifa, thank you so much.
Nice seeing you.
I was about to say that how lovely that a lover of wildlife like you has found, has got the chance to live in a house like that, in an area like you're describing, and to have wildlife around you. How marvelous.
It's a blessing.
Arifa, you look like a fashion model. And to know that you are a wildlife enthusiast and unafraid of creatures and the forest at night, wow, what a wonderful thing. It seems a contradiction in terms, but you have brought these two poles together. Wonderful to have met you again. Lovely to have heard you talk. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Mo and Satish and everyone. It was wonderful interacting with you.
Thank you.
And as I said, if someone is coming this way, do let me know.
Mo, all right.
Just might take you up on that.
Thank you.
Son-in-law is Sri Lankan,
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. So
right.
Thank you very much. We look forward to more books from you. We look forward to meeting you more often and hearing you tell the stories, because that's just such a pleasure. And thank you everybody who came. Thank you, Airaj, particularly because you have so much knowledge of this area. It was really good having you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Farooq, would you like to have the last word?
I just want to add that on 13th, we are going to be presenting Nida Fazli. It's going to be a literature-based Urdu program on the poetry and the songs that he wrote for all the Hindi music. And it will be a very, very enriching program. 13th of November, we'll have Nida Fazli from my side.
And of course, it will come if the news will.
Yeah, next 2-3 days, you'll get the news.
Yes. Okay, bye-bye. Arif, bye. Thank you. And everyone, bye-bye. Good night. Happy
Good night.
Good night.
Tehsin, thank you very much. Amit, thank you very much.
About Diwali.